Alrighty, we'll get started. 1 second. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Student Loans 101 webinar. Today's webinar features Mark Kantrowitz, publisher and VP of Research for SavingForCollege.com. He knows the ins and outs of student loans and is really our expert voice on college savings and spending. He's often quoted in publications like Forbes and Wall Street Journal, and we're really excited to have him take you through how much to borrow when considering a student loan. I'm Tina Lopez, and I'll be serving as moderator today. You can also feel free to type your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. We do get many questions during these webinars, so we'll try to address the most common ones. And if any of your questions don't get answered, don't worry, Mark will be publishing articles to answer more. So visit savingforcollege.com/student-loans for more information. Today's webinar is brought to you by Student Loan Hero. Student Loan Hero is proud to sponsor SavingForCollege.com's How Much to Borrow 101 webinar. Student Loan Hero is one of the simplest ways to find affordable private student loans at competitive rates. We'll share more information about them and how you can compare your loan options today at the end of the webinar. We appreciate the support from our friends at Student Loan Hero. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Kantrowitz to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Tina. So this webinar is about how much you should or should not borrow to pay for college. How much student loan debt is reasonable and affordable? Let's start with advice about borrowing too much student loan debt. So student loan debt is affordable if it can be repaid in a reasonable amount of time, which is generally about 10 years or less. So the student's total debt at graduation, including any parent loans that they're expected to repay, should be less than the student's annual starting salary. If the total debt is less than the annual income, they can afford to repay their student loans in 10 years or less. And you might ask, how do I know how much the student's going to earn after graduation? Well, you can use a variety of resources like payscale.com, salary.com, BLS.gov, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE. The U.S. Department of Education also publishes something called the College Scorecard that may have some useful income information, not just on a per school basis, but even on a per major basis, that you can use to figure out likely what the current income is. Now, whether that's going to reflect where the income will be in 4 years is often harder to predict, but it gets you into the right ballpark. Now, you want to keep your student loan debt in sync with income after graduation, because if the total student loan debt at graduation exceeds your annual income, you're going to struggle to repay this student loan debt, and you may even default. Now, there are options for repaying the loans even if you borrow too much money. An extended repayment, an income-driven repayment will reduce your monthly loan payments by stretching out the term of the loan to 20, 25, or even 30 years. But not only will you be in debt for a longer period of time, you will also have to pay more interest over the life of the loan. So really, you want to keep your total student loan debt in sync with your income after graduation, and ideally a lot less. Now, there are some signs that you may be borrowing too much money. We just went over the rule that if your debt exceeds your annual income. Federal student loan limits for undergraduate students total $27,000 over 4 years, with an aggregate limit of $31,000 if the student's a dependent student. Independent students get higher loan limits. And if a student's parents are denied a federal Parent Plus loan, they get the same limits as independent students, which are up to $57,500 over a 5-year period. Now, there is something called a debt to income ratio, which is what the percentage of your gross monthly income is going to repay your student loans. And generally, this should be no more than 10% of your gross income. You maybe could stretch to 15%, but anything more than that is going to be a struggle. Now, the federal government pays the interest on subsidized loans during deferment, but not during a forbearance. The government does not pay the interest on subsidized or unsubsidized loans. Well, it doesn't pay the interest on unsubsidized loans during either a deferment or forbearance. So if you use a deferment or forbearance to avoid facing your student loan debt, you may just be adding on more and more interest, which will make it more difficult to repay your student loan debt. And obviously, if you've found that you had no choice but to switch to an extended or income-driven repayment plan, that's another sign that you're borrowing too much money or borrow too much money. And it's hard to fix this after the fact. Now, in recent years, student loan burden has been shifting from the students to the parents. And that's because students in bachelor degree programs have been hitting the federal student loan limits, which haven't increased since 2008. And that shifts the additional borrowing from the student to the parents because the student can't borrow more than the federal student loan limits. And they could also borrow private loans, which are co-signed by the parents. And that, again, is a burden on the parents, not just the student. And in this chart, you can see that until around 2013, 14, or 2014, 15, you had maybe 1/6 of the percentage of parents who were borrowing as a percentage of undergraduate loans was about 1 in 6. But then it started going up very steadily as the students in bachelor degree programs started hitting the limit. Students in certificates and associate degree programs still haven't hit the limits, and graduate students have more generous limits. So this has mainly been a phenomenon caused by students in bachelor degree programs. Now we can also ask the question, and we know how much the student should borrow, but how much should the parents borrow? So the federal Parent Plus loans have an annual limit equal to the cost of attendance minus other aid, with no aggregate limit. So you can almost borrow an unlimited amount of money as a parent to pay for your child's college education. You want to max out the student loans first because they're cheaper, but you could, once the student reaches those limits, borrow Parent Plus loans to cover the entire cost of education. You can also borrow private student loans to cover. Many of them also have a cost of attendance minus aid limit. And then if you have excellent credit, a private parent loan or a private student loan may actually have a competitive interest rate and no fees compared to the Parent Plus loan. So you do need to shop around and consider the trade-offs between the two. Now, a good rule of thumb is that total parent loans, including loans borrowed for all their children, should be no more than the parent's annual income. This is similar to the rule for the student loans. And in fact, the parents should keep their student loan debt in sync with the parent's income. More than a third of parents, however, borrow federal Parent Plus loans for just their one child, that their cumulative Parent Plus loan debt exceeds their annual income. And this is based on data from 2015-16. So we see that sometimes parents are already borrowing too much money. Now, this may be because they're expecting the child to repay the debt, but even then it may be shifting too much burden on the child, because remember, child should borrow no more than their annual income either. So parents should also, if they're going to be retiring soon, they should plan on paying off all their parent loans and other debt as well by the time they retire. Now, if they will be retiring in only 5 years, not the full 10 years or longer, they should borrow half as much, because that rule of thumb is based on assumption that you're going to take 10 years to repay the debt. Now, you should not assume that the child's going to pay off the parent loans, because it's not just because the child may end up paying back too much debt. If the child defaults on the payments on a federal Parent Plus loan, that plus loan is still in the parent's name. Or if the child defaults on a private student loan that was co-signed by the parent, it can ruin the parent's credit, not just the child's credit. So let's talk about how you can borrow less. And the first method is to save before college. If you save $200 a month for 10 years at 6.8% interest, you'll accumulate $34,433. If you borrow this amount and you repay it at 6.8% interest over a 10-year repayment term, you're going to pay $396 a month, almost twice as much. The difference is that when you save, you earn the interest. When you borrow, you pay the interest. And every dollar you borrow is going to cost about $2 by the time you repay the debt, given the mix of interest rates and repayment terms and capitalized interest and adding loan fees to the loan balance that people do when they're borrowing both federal and private student loans. So it's cheaper to save than to borrow. Saving for college is going to provide you not just with less debt at graduation, but it also gives you the flexibility to choose a college that is more expensive than what you otherwise could afford. Now, we recommend that you save in a 529 plan because 529 plans provide significant federal and state tax benefits as well as financial aid advantages. And there are other ways to save. You can ask friends and family to chip in. There are programs like credit cards that give you rebates that sweep into your 529 plan. There are a lot of options for saving before college. Instead of birthday and holiday and graduation presents, ask friends and family to give money to the 529 plan. If they don't do that, well, then sell the presents and put the money in the 529 plan. Now, you should also, before you borrow, focus on free money first. Grants and scholarships are gift aid, which is free money that does not need to be earned through work or repaid. You might need to earn it by winning a scholarship, but you don't have to work a job or pay back that money. You should file the FAFSA to apply for need-based financial aid and do this every year. You should search and apply for scholarships, and every dollar you win is a dollar less you're going to have to borrow. We don't have our own scholarship search service, but we have lists of articles on our website, and we also have a list of more than a dozen free scholarship matching services on our website. The educational tax benefits include the opportunity tax credit, the lifetime learning tax credit, and the tuition and fees deduction. You can't double dip, so you have to choose one, and of these, the American Opportunity Tax Credit provides the greatest financial benefit. It's worth up to a $2,500 tax credit on your federal income tax return based on $4,000 of tuition and textbook expenses. You can also, the student can work part-time during the academic year and full-time during the summer and holidays. That's what I did when I was an undergraduate student. I also won a lot of scholarships. And some employers will provide you with money to help pay for college as an employee benefit. Now, the next thing you can do is try to cut your college costs. You could earn credit in high school, and you can earn it through AP classes, international baccalaureate classes, CLEP, and as well as dual enrollment programs. You could choose a less expensive college, such as an in-state public college. They cost about a quarter to a third the cost of a private college, but you get just as good a quality education at a much lower cost. There are about 6 dozen colleges that offer generous no loans financial aid policies. These colleges replace loans with grants in the financial aid package. Students at these colleges are much less likely to graduate with debt. They can still borrow, but they generally don't borrow as much, and fewer of them do borrow. And so the average debt at graduation will be much lower at these colleges. And all of the most prestigious colleges, the Ivy League colleges, MIT and Stanford, have no loans financial aid policies. They're replacing the loans with grants. As far as colleges that offer free tuition, there's a few of them. Alice Lloyd College in Kentucky, Barclay College in Kansas, Berea College also in Kentucky, College of the Ozarks in Missouri, Curtis Institute School of Music in Pennsylvania, Deep Springs College in California, the Webb Institute in West Virginia, and there's a particular honors college at CUNY in New York. And there's also the Williamson Free School of Mechanical Trades, again in Pennsylvania. However, these colleges may have no tuition, but they will have non-tuition costs that are of $10,000 or more. And one of them is entirely free, but many of them you still have to pay something. There are also 24 foreign countries that provide free tuition, some of them even to international students, like students from the US. But again, the living expenses are your responsibility, and those can be high. And that also includes the cost of getting to the country. And note that 529 plans can't be used to pay for transportation costs. They can be used to pay for other elements of the cost of attendance, but not travel expenses to and from the college. Okay. You should always compare the colleges based on the net price, not the sticker price, to identify which college is going to ultimately cost you less and involve less debt. The net price is the difference between the full cost of attendance and gift aid, like the grants and scholarships. When you're evaluating a college's cost, you're going to get a financial aid award letter or notification, and these things can be incredibly confusing and not at all clear. So make sure you understand which of these awards are gift aid, money that doesn't need to be repaid, and which are student loans. They may not use the word loan to identify an award in that financial aid award letter, so you may be surprised to learn that you borrowed a lot of money. Now, the net price ultimately, because it's the discounted sticker price, it's the amount that you're going to have to pay from savings, income, and loans. And the higher the net price, the more likely you are to borrow, and the more debt you will have at graduation. As I said before, every dollar you borrow is going to cost about $2 by the time you repay the debt. So before you buy anything, ask yourself if you'd still be willing to buy it at twice the price, because realistically, that's what it's going to cost you. Need to distinguish between needs and wants. Buy used textbooks, sell the textbooks back to the bookstore at the end of the semester. You can save about half on textbook costs. Minimize the number of trips home from school if you're going to school halfway across the country. If you live off campus, get a roommate to split the rent. Avoid eating out, specialty drinks, food from vending machines, unless someone else is paying. Even if you're just getting a $10 pizza a week because you don't like the cafeteria food, which you already paid for, that $10 pizza a week is going to add up to $2,000 over a 4-year college career. And it may not be pizza, it may be ramen noodles or something else, but it really does add up. So $10 pizza works out to be a lot of dough. And if you use student loan money to pay for it instead of $2,000, it's going to cost you $4,000. You should plan a path from your initial entrance into college to completion so that you can graduate on time. Graduating on time will help you save on college costs. Because if it takes you an additional year or two to graduate, that means an additional year or two of student loan debt. You should take only classes that count towards your graduation, and you can take occasional electives, but try to make sure that the classes you're taking, for the most part, are going to help you graduate. And be careful about class scheduling issues. And some classes are offered infrequently, and if you miss it this year, you might have to wait a year or two to take it again. And some of them require prerequisites, so you can't take this class until you've taken a different class. So you really need to figure out when you're going to take classes, in which year, and create a schedule so that you know when to take which classes. Now let's talk about borrowing smart. So the first thing you need to do is budget before you borrow. Create a budget that helps you avoid borrowing more than what you really need. Because don't borrow what you can, borrow only what you need. Now, first of all, you need to figure out all your college costs. As I said before, these award letters, sometimes they don't mention all your college costs. They might only mention direct costs, which is money paid to the college, like tuition and fees, and if you're living in campus housing, room and board, but not all the other costs, as though those costs don't really exist. So college costs include not just tuition fees, housing, meal plans, but also textbooks, supplies, equipment, transportation, and miscellaneous expenses. In addition, you need to consider hidden college costs, which may also be called indirect costs, and those can add $300 to $500 per month. Examples include front loading of grants, so you get more grants the first year than in subsequent years. Well, that means you're going to have to borrow more after your freshman year. The taxes are something that people often overlook. If you're living in a fraternity or sorority, there are Greek life dues. Study abroad programs can add to your costs. If you change majors, that can add an additional semester or two to your college career because some of your previous classes won't count towards your new major. And obviously, having fun, eating out, entertainment, that can add significantly to college costs. So you need to budget for all of these. What I recommend is that you do a descriptive budget as opposed to a prescriptive budget. Just start with tracking your spending. That is going to increase your awareness of your spending, which is the first step in exercising restraint. If you know how much you're spending on eating out, the next time you go to go to a restaurant, you're going to hesitate, and that will help you spend less. And you can track your spending using a simple spreadsheet program like the Google Docs spreadsheets, or a program like Quicken or Mint.com. Quicken you have to pay for, Mint.com is free. These will help you track your spending and should categorize the spending into broad categories like food, housing, medical care, and the like, tuition. And also label it as to whether it was a need or a want, because you'll find that your wants quickly add up to more spending. And that's when you try to limit your spending, that's the first place that you're going to try to rein in the spending. And now let's talk about understanding your student loans. You need to know your student loans. Increasing your awareness of how much you're borrowing is going to help you limit your borrowing. You also need to understand what the impact of your student loans will be on you after you graduate. And calculate your monthly loan payments assuming a 10-year repayment term, which is a reasonable amount of time, and compare it with other common budget items like car loan payments. You'll find that if you borrow $30,000 in student loan debt, that's going to be a little bit more than $300 a month after you graduate. And on average, student loan payments are about $350 a month for recent college graduates. And so that's effectively the same as a car payment, but for 10 years instead of just 3 to 5 years. So you're going to be stuck with paying for a car for a decade after you graduate, and you don't even get the car to drive it. Or it's the difference between a really nice car and a bare bones car like a Yaris, which gets you from point A to point B, but not much more than that. Oops. Something happened. So done with that, yes. Okay, so now let's talk about cutting your borrowing costs. And first thing that you need to do is limit your borrowing, borrow less. Don't treat the loan limits as targets, borrow only what you need, not as much as you can. Consider, instead of borrowing money, using a tuition installment plan. This is if you can afford to pay the bills, just not in one big lump sum. They are a reasonable alternative to long-term debt. They spread out the college costs in equal monthly installments over an academic term or academic year. They may charge a small upfront fee, but they don't charge interest. Now, if you must borrow, you should borrow federal student loans first, because federal student loans are less expensive, easier to get, and have better repayment terms than private student loans. They have low fixed interest rates without regard to your credit score. They do not depend on your income or debt to income ratios for eligibility, or duration of employment. They have longer deferments and forbearances than private student loans. Federal loans provide extended repayment and income-driven repayment plans and loan forgiveness options. Also, among the federal loans, you should prefer subsidized loans over unsubsidized loans because the federal government pays the interest during the in-school period. But the problem with federal student loans is they have low annual and aggregate loan limits. So you may not be able to borrow enough to pay for your entire college education, especially if you're at a higher cost college. So if you exhaust these federal loan limits, you should be careful because that may be a sign that you're borrowing too much money. But if you need to borrow, you should shop around for the least expensive private student loan. And that's something where our sponsor can potentially help you. They let you apply to multiple loans and see what interest rates you're actually going to get. The lowest cost loan is going to depend not just on the interest rates, but on the fees. Many private student loans charge no fees, and also on any loan discounts that are offered by the lender. We have our own rating system that tries to combine all the impact of all that. You should apply with a credit-worthy cosigner. Most private student loans to undergraduate students are going to require a cosigner. More than 90% of them do. But even if you can qualify for your own, for a private student loan on your own, you're going to potentially get a lower interest rate if you apply with a cosigner. Of course, the cosigner, and there's risk associated with that for the cosigner, because then they're on the hook for the loan as well. But they can help you get a better interest rate and also increase your odds of being approved for the loan. If you can make payments during the in-school and grace periods, for at least new interest that accrues, that keeps your loan from getting larger. Otherwise, and your loan balance at graduation may be about a fifth larger than the amount you received to pay for your education. And some lenders will even give you a discount on your interest rate if you agree to make payments during the in-school period. You can save you 1/4 or 0.5% or something similar. Now, you may have heard of income share agreements as being the solution to the student loan problem. They aren't a solution to the student loan problem because they're just another form of debt. Instead of paying a fixed amount for a set period of time, you're paying a fixed percentage of income. And these are priced actually to be more expensive than many private student loans. So you should be careful about them. I mean, you can consider them, but try to model out what they're actually going to cost you and how that compares to the private student loans before you jump into them. And the next thing we need to be careful about is what's called moral hazard. Moral hazard occurs when you borrow more than you need to because you're figuring that it's all going to be forgiven anyway. And this may be because you think that the next president is just going to wipe out all student loans, or maybe you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness or another loan forgiveness program, and you think that this is going to wipe out all of your debt. And that's like borrowing more than you need to because you expect to have it forgiven is like borrowing money to buy lottery tickets because you hope to win the jackpot. And it just isn't going to happen. And the experience of borrowers with public service loan forgiveness has been that very few qualify, and part of that may be that they're applying too soon, but it is very difficult to meet the criteria for qualifying for loan forgiveness. So there are risks with this approach. In most applications, as I said, and it's only about 3% of applications for public service loan forgiveness have been approved. And even if you qualify, you're still going to be paying a lot on your student loans until you qualify. And if you're in an income-driven repayment plan and not in public service loan forgiveness, that loan forgiveness at the end of the 20 or 25-year repayment period is taxable under current law. So you're going to substitute a smaller tax debt for your education debt. So the tax liability on $45,000 in loan forgiveness will be more than $10,000. So you're still going to pay something even on that forgiveness. The government gives with one hand while taking back with the other. And the fact that you have the student loans is going to affect your ability to qualify for other credit, like a home mortgage. And mortgages have limits on the percentage of monthly income that can go to repaying any debt, not just the mortgage debt. Now, I try to discourage people from borrowing from retirement plans and home equity plans. Um, if you retirement plan loans usually must be repaid in just 5 years. That's more difficult to do. And if you lose your job, then you have to pay it back immediately. Otherwise, the loan is going to be treated as a taxable distribution from the retirement plan. Okay, there are also other drawbacks to borrowing from retirement plans. 401k plans are funded with pre-tax money, but a 401k loan is repaid with after-tax money. And that money will be taxed again when the funds are withdrawn when you retire, leading to double taxation. And until the 401k loan is repaid, you may miss out on the employer match for new contributions to your retirement plan. Some employer plans will not give you a match until that loan is repaid. And the employer match is free money, so you don't want to miss out on that. Now, borrowing from a home equity loan or a line of credit puts your home at risk. If you default on this loan, you can lose your home. If you default on a student loan, the lender can't repossess your education. Some students may wish that they could, but the reality is there's much greater risk with a home mortgage using that to pay for college. Also, the interest that's paid on a home equity loan or line of credit is no longer tax deductible if you're using it for something other than improving your home. And that's runs through the 2025. It was instituted by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. It might even get extended. The other problem is it may affect your financial aid. The proceeds from a home equity loan or retirement plan loan, if you've got it in your bank account, is going to count as an asset on the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form, as well as the CSS profile form. And they're not going to say, well, you have this debt that offsets it. They ignore the debt. They just count the asset. So until you spend that money, it's going to reduce your eligibility for need-based financial aid. Now, what if you have money that left over from your student loans? What can you do about that? And first thing you can do is return that extra money to the lender. That will reduce the amount that you owe. If you're still in school and you want to return extra money to the lender, ask the College Financial Aid Office how you do this. They may be able to simply take the money out of your student account and return it to the lender. And if you don't return the unsubsidized federal loans within 120 days, you're going to owe interest that is accrued since the date of disbursement. If you return it within 120 days, no interest is charged. And even if you have to pay some interest while you're in school because you waited until after 120 days, it's usually a relatively small amount. On subsidized loans, the federal government pays the interest during the in-school period, so there's no rush to return it until you graduate. And maybe you use that subsidized loans instead of unsubsidized loans to pay for your education. Even if you have too much of the subsidized loans, well, you hold it on to it for the next year. There's no penalty for doing so, whereas an unsubsidized loan will accrue interest during that period. And if you decide to keep the money, despite the charging of interest, you're going to increase the amount of your debt because that interest gets added to the loan balance. But sometimes borrowers will do this if next year they expect to need more money than their annual loan limits in the federal loans. They decide to keep this year's excess loans to cover that cost. Now, what happens if you borrow too much student loan debt? There are lots of negative consequences. An extra $10,000 in student loan money will increase your loan payments by about $100 on a 10-year repayment term. So it increases your costs after you graduate. And borrowers who graduate with too much debt, more than they can afford to repay in 10 years, they delay their other financial goals like buying a car, buying a home, getting married, having children, saving for retirement, and saving for their children's college educations. And too much debt can also cause you to cut back on basic necessities like food, housing, and medical care. And you only have so much income in your budget that you can use to cover your expenses. If you have to pay your student loans or other debts, that's going to cause more financial pressure. And you're also, if you miss student loan payments, the late fees are about 6% of the late payments. That's going to increase your costs. And when your next payment on your student loans is going to be applied first to the late fees, then to interest, and only last to the principal balance of the loan, which means your principal balance will be higher, which means you're going to pay more interest over the life of that loan. And if you miss too many payments, the student loans will go into default, making a bad situation worse. If you don't pay federal loans for 360 days, you're in default. If you don't pay private student loans for 120 days, you're in default. And if you default on your student loans, your wages can be garnished, your income tax refunds intercepted, and your Social Security, disability, and retirement benefits payments will be reduced. And if you work for the federal government, your wages will be reduced. So there are a few options, however, for dealing with having too much debt. First thing you can do is change your repayment plans. You should choose the repayment plan with the highest monthly payment that you can afford. If you pay more than the minimum, you're going to reduce the total interest you pay over the life of the loan. If you're having trouble repaying your loans under the standard 10-year repayment plan, your options include extended repayment and income-driven repayment, and these reduce your monthly payments by stretching out the term of the loan. So you're going to be in debt for 2 to 3 times as long, and you will pay more interest over the life of the loan, but the loan payments will fit into your budget better, and you'll be less likely to be late with a payment or even default. Take advantage of the auto pay discounts that many lenders offer, where if you sign up to have your monthly payments automatically transferred from your bank account to the lender, they'll reduce your interest rate by 1/4%, sometimes 0.5%. That's going to save you money. Also take advantage of the student loan interest deduction. This is an above the line exclusion from income for up to $2,500 that you paid during the year in interest on federal and private student loans. You can claim the deduction even if you don't claim the standard deduction and don't itemize. Typically, it saves you a few $100s on your taxes. Nothing to sneeze at. You can free up cash to help you make extra payments on your student loans and then target the loan with the highest interest rate for quicker repayment. That will reduce your average interest rate and save you money over the life of the loan. For example, anything that you haven't used in a year can be sold to raise money to pay off your debt. Because if you haven't used it in a year, you don't really need it. You could adopt an austere lifestyle. You start by cutting the most expensive household budget items like housing and transportation. And you can move back in with mom and dad to save on rent or get a roommate to split the rent. Sell your car and buy a cheaper car, a used car, or a bicycle, or use public transportation. Use coupons whenever you go grocery shopping. That saves you a few dollars a week, which can add up to a few $100s a year. Okay. Ask your boss for a raise. That can increase your income, especially if you're doing a great job. Work overtime. That may get you more money if you're not an exempt employee. Get a part-time job or a gig job in the evenings and weekends to earn extra money to pay down your debt. An added benefit of working part-time as a second job is that you'll have less time to spend money. Okay. Now you can ask your friends and family to help you repay your student loans instead of the usual holiday and birthday presents. So before college, we say, instead of holiday and birthday presents, give money to the 529 plan, savings for college. After college, pay down the student loans. Okay. That will make a bigger difference in your life than having another widget or other thing that you might not use for very long. Now, if parents borrow too much and don't have the assets to pay off their debt, they can choose extended or income-driven repayment plan to reduce the impact of the loan payments on their cash flow. In other words, you're stretching out the repayment term for as long as possible so that maybe your student loans will outlive you. And All federal loans have a death discharge, and many private student loans also have a death discharge that the borrower dies, the debt is can't remaining debt is canceled. Okay. And then also federal student loans are discharged not just upon the death of the borrower, but a parent plus loan is discharged upon death of the student. So, but I wouldn't recommend that. Um, Now, federal parent plus loans are not directly eligible for income-driven repayment plans, but if you include them in a federal direct consolidation loan, that consolidation loan is eligible for income contingent repayment. So now back to Tina.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Mark. I think we all know a lot more about how much we should borrow and what to be mindful of. So get ready because we have a number of questions for you, Mark. But before you start answering questions, I just want to thank our partner again. Student Loan Hero is proud to sponsor savingforcollege.com's How Much to Borrow 101 webinar. Student Loan Hero is one of the simplest ways to find affordable private student loans at competitive rates. There are a lot of scholarships and grants out there, but it can be really hard figuring out which ones will pay the best for your education. And Student Loan Hero helps compare private student loans so you make the right choices about your financial aid. Find affordable loans, choose your ideal repayment plan, check out resources on loan forgiveness, and start classes this fall with a lot less stress. And you can start comparing your student loan options today at studentloanhero.com. Thanks again. And now let's get to those questions for you, Mark. So one question I saw pop up a few times, should parents take out the loans in their name, or should they have their children take them out and they co-sign?
Okay. So first of all, they should borrow federal first because the federal student loans are cheaper, more available, and better repayment terms than the parent loans or the private loans. But if you've reached those loan limits, you have a choice between the parent plus loan, the private student loan, and the private parent loans. One difference is who's responsible for repaying the debt. Sometimes the parents don't want to put too much burden on their child. Sometimes the parents want to control the debt so that if the child misses a payment, it doesn't ruin the parent's credit as well. There's also differences in the cost. The federal parent plus loan has a fixed interest rate that's the same for all parents, regardless of their credit quality, whereas private student loans that are co-signed by the parent and private parent loans may have a lower interest rate if the parent has excellent credit. So you should shop around to compare the cost of the loans and also consider the other aspects of the loans, such as what are the deferment and forbearance options? Is there any loan forgiveness? And other things that affect the cost and flexibility of the loans. And we have tools on our website like an objective rating of each of the private student loans, private parent loans, and private refinances coming soon to help you make a smarter decision about which loans you're interested in. And the sponsor also offers similar tools on their website.
Great. Another question we have here, are there parental income limits that prohibit federal subsidized loans for your children discovered through the FAFSA process, or do all children have the ability to get subsidized interest loans each year?
Okay. So the subsidized Stafford loans depend on financial need. Financial need is determined by the free application for federal student aid, which is based on the income and assets of the student and the income and assets of the parents and a variety of other demographic factors like family size, number of children in college, and the like. So the higher the parent's income, the higher the EFC and the less eligibility there is for subsidized loans. Now, subsidized loans are based on financial need, which is the difference between the cost of attendance and the expected family contribution. So it's not just having a lower EFC, you can also demonstrate financial need by attending a higher cost college. So wealthier parents tend to send their children to higher cost colleges. So every $10,000 of additional parent income generally increases the EFC by about $3,000. But if you're talking the difference between an in-state public college and a private college, that may be tens of thousands of dollars additional financial need, all else being equal.
Okay, thank you. And is it a good idea to start paying on unsubsidized loans while in school if you can? Advise as to the amount versus salary cap again.
Okay, so that reminds me that unsubsidized loans don't depend on income. And in fact, with a private student loan, the higher your income, the more likely you are to qualify. So the benefit of making payments during the in-school period is that it's going to reduce your debt at graduation, because the interest that accrues during that in-school period, if you don't pay it as it accrues, will get added to the loan balance, increasing the amount of debt. So the more you pay, the lower the balance is at graduation. And generally, lenders of private student loans offer four in-school payment options. One is full deferment, where you don't make any payments, and that interest gets added to the loan balance. In some cases, just once when the loan enters repayment. Sometimes it'll be added as frequently as monthly, which is a little bit more expensive because then you can start getting charged interest on interest through compounding. The next option is what's called a touch payment, which is typically about $25 per loan per month. And it's intended to just keep you in touch with the amount you're borrowing and in contact with the lender. You're less likely to default if you're making some payment. And so the lenders like that. Then there's interest only, which may be about the same, or it may be higher depending on the amount you borrowed. And then finally, you could do fully amortized loan payments starting soon after the loans are dispersed. The Parent Plus loan used to be like that, but now borrowers have the option of deferring the Parent Plus loan while their children are in school.
Do you have an estimate of how much money to allocate for the stuff a student would need unrelated to the academic part? Mattresses, towels, laundry supplies, coffee makers, things like that. What stuff is essential versus nice to have, and which nice to have is really essential to maintain a minimum quality of life?
Right. So there's the direct costs and the indirect costs, and the colleges do have an official cost of attendance figure, the student budget, that includes those costs. But then there are the hidden college costs that you asked about in this question. And I estimate that it's anywhere between $300 and $500 a month during the academic year for these costs. And they do add up. And some things you do need, like shampoo, soap, laundry detergent, you have to use that. But other things are more discretionary, like how many times do you eat out a month? Do you go to baseball games or football games, and do you pay for those, or is someone else paying, or is it a free game? Do you go to the movies? And all those aren't necessary, but they're part of the college experience. And so what you might want to do is figure out a budget for how much you're willing to spend for each of these categories. You take care of what you need to spend first. So you buy that shampoo and detergent, and then the leftover money each month, you use that to pay for the fun stuff. And when the money runs out, then you stop. And then you wait until the next month and your budget gets refreshed. So maybe you have a limit on how much you're going to withdraw from your bank account each month so that you don't go overboard. Or maybe the parents only transfer in a month's worth of money into your bank account each month to make sure you're not spending too much money. Now, what some students do is they get a part-time job, even if they don't qualify for a work-study job, to just get this walking around money that they need in order to have fun while they're at college and not just be studying all the time.
Okay. And should we take advantage of the Parents Plus loan?
So if you need money to pay for school, if your savings and contributions from income and those tax benefits aren't enough, you have two choices. You either transfer to a less expensive college, or you borrow the money, and maybe you get a part-time job to earn more money to help pay for it, but the money has to come from somewhere. So I wouldn't say take advantage in that, oh, just borrow to the limit. You should borrow what you need, not what you can. So figure out exactly how much you need, budget before you borrow, and then you can borrow from a parent loan or a private loan. And what I recommend doing is shopping around, see what interest rates you're going to get on the private loan, what interest rate you'll pay on the parent loan. And currently, Parent Plus loans have a 5.3% interest rate, and they have fees of a little bit more than 4%, which is the equivalent of a 1% higher interest rate. So if you can get a private parent loan for less than 6%, you're probably going to save money. But you miss out on some of the advantages, the benefits of the federal loans, like these 3-year deferments and forbearances instead of 1-year deferments and forbearances. Especially important right now when the pandemic is causing people to lose their jobs and need these suspensions of the obligation to repay the debt. But parents may be in a better position to estimate whether they're going to need this in the future than a student fresh out of college.
Okay. Do assets like real estate determine how much you're eligible for? My kid is not eligible for aid because I have investment real estate, but not a lot of income, but schools don't seem to care. They seem to want you to sell or take out a loan, which sometimes is not possible if your income is not enough to qualify for repayment.
Okay. So the FAFSA ignores the net worth of the family home, but does count any investment real estate. And it'll either be a business asset or it'll be an investment asset, depending on whether it's part of the formally recognized business, like a corporation, or if you're doing value-added services beyond simply renting the property, like maid service or bed and breakfast. The CSS profile form, which is used by less than 200 mostly private colleges, it considers all real estate, including the family home. And they're going to treat this like an asset. So if you own $1 million of real estate, after subtracting the mortgages that are secured by that real estate, that's going to count like $1 million in cash. They don't distinguish between the two. And that's going to reduce aid eligibility by as much as 5.64% of that asset value. And that's enough to eliminate aid eligibility. Now, if you are limited in your ability to sell the real estate, I appeal to the college, provide them with documentation that shows that the housing market is largely frozen, that you'd only be able to sell this at a huge loss, and that that's not a realistic option for you. Or if there are other limitations that prevent you from selling it, let them know about it. Some colleges will make an adjustment, especially in states that have, where the cost of real estate is out of line with family income, like California. Someone might have bought a property 30 years ago when real estate was much less expensive, and now it's grown so much that the value of that real estate is completely out of sync with your income and your ability to pay. So I make the colleges aware of the constraints. Many won't make an adjustment, but some will.
Okay. And will a college subtract from their financial aid package the amount of any externally awarded scholarships found using other scholarship tools?
Right. So the colleges base need-based financial aid on financial need. And when you win a private scholarship, they say your financial need went down. And they will then reduce your financial aid package. This is called scholarship displacement. Now, how they reduce the financial aid package can vary from one college to the next. Some methods are more favorable than others. For example, if the colleges leave you with unmet financial need, a gap, and you win a private scholarship, you can ask them to reduce that unmet need. Or if they insist that you must have that unmet need, well, if they reduce your loans, that's better than they're reducing your grants. So ask about their scholarship displacement policy. They often call this an outside scholarship policy before you sign up to enroll at that college. That way you know what's going to happen if you do win that big scholarship. Some scholarships are paid directly to the family, and the family doesn't necessarily tell the college about it. The colleges all have policies that say you must tell them. And they have ways of figuring it out. Like if you have a scholarship that you use for things other than tuition and textbooks, like room and board, well, those amounts are going to be taxable, and you'll have to put that on your federal income tax return with an annotation that tells the college that that you received a scholarship, and then they're going to start asking questions. Some colleges even go so far as to scan the lists of scholarship winners for major scholarships and high school scholarships from graduation scholarships to see if you got any money, and then they'll contact you asking why you didn't report this to them. That's unfortunate that scholarships get displaced by the colleges, and some scholarships can be taxed, which prevents the students from making full use of their scholarships.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to be combining two questions. International students, are they eligible to apply for federal loan? And then what are the loan options for individuals who are pending U.S. resident status?
Okay, so if you are a U.S. citizen, a green card holder, a U.S. permanent resident, and a very limited set of eligible non-citizens like asylum seekers, then you are eligible for federal student aid, and you will complete the FAFSA using either your social security number if you're a U.S. citizen, or alien registration number if you have green card status. Other international students are not eligible for U.S. federal student loans, and many private student loan lenders require that you either be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, or that you have a cosigner who is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. There are a handful of lenders that now make loans to international students who aren't U.S. citizens and don't have a cosigner. We do have a short list of them on our website. But unfortunately, just like when a U.S. citizen goes to college outside the U.S., they aren't eligible for that country's financial aid. The same thing occurs when an international student is studying in the U.S. There are very few scholarship and student loan programs that are open to international students, but there are a few. So international students should still search for scholarships on these free scholarship matching websites.
Okay, great. Thanks again, Mark, and thank you everyone who attended and submitted your questions. If any of your questions did not get answered, as a reminder, Mark will be publishing articles to answer some of them. So visit savingforcollege.com/student-loans for more information. And a big thank you again to our sponsors, Student Loan Hero. Visit studentloanhero.com to start comparing your loan options today.